Hey, and welcome to the Chris Vaughn Podcast, episode 002. Hey, and welcome, and I'm glad you're with us again today for this week's podcast, and getting some notes here, and just want to thank you for being with us again. Thank you for taking the time, letting us come to you. I always pray and hope that this is enlightening, helpful, and again, our focus is always on three things. It is getting our life unstuck and getting in the direction we want to. Two, it is smart living, doing the processes to live smart. And lastly, it is about passive income. We haven't touched on that yet, but then again, this is only the second, technically the third. We started from zero podcast. So hey, this week I wanted to do something a little different and bring something to you. We are in the midst of holidays, and I said that I think last week about how to have a happy holiday surrounded by unhappy people. And so there's a lot of things that go on during the holidays. Sadly, there is a lot of times when people are just manipulated and guilted. Now, I have studied human behavior my whole life. I'm probably as much of a people watcher as I am anything. But I love to watch that and try to deconstruct that. But I grew up in a realm of people that love to manipulate. They used guilt, tactics, manipulation. Witchcraft is what I want to call it. And so they have done some things, and I've learned some things. And so after that, I wanted to just kind of bring some things that you can recognize a manipulator, and then how to deal with the manipulator. I don't know about you, but being manipulated is not a fun task. It is not something that is enjoyable. You actually leave that situation feeling used and abused, and it's never a positive. One example of being manipulated is a wife who stays in an abusive relationship with their husband, or a husband who stays in an abusive relationship with the wife. It can also be a child and a parent, where the parent manipulates the child to get what they want. It can be a work relationship. It can be so many things. Most cases of control are very subtle. It's not sometimes physical abuse or direct, harsh verbal abuse to beat someone down. It can be, sadly. But manipulation is out there, and many times the people that we need help from the most, we give in to the manipulation, and we will cave, roll over, and not be who we're called to be. One of the greatest things that God has given us is the ability to make decisions and to be who we feel called to be, the gifts that He has given us, and the ability to control ourselves, to direct ourselves. So you always need to start from that platform. So here's a couple things you can look for. If you're in a relationship and you feel like you're being manipulated, but you're not sure, here's some telltale signs. Number one, the manipulator doesn't allow you to have your own opinion or argument in any type of disagreement. Controlling people like that, they'll not allow you to have your own set of opinions. And you either have to come into line with their opinions or agree with their opinions. And if you don't, it all starts, and it can start being very subtle or subtly, but it can also be very abusive and very confrontational. Their place of power comes from being right and being able to exert control. And they can't handle it if you disagree with them. Sometimes, my dad used to actually just disagree with me to make me argue my point, to try to make sure I understood what I believed. It's a great process in parenting. Some people thought we were being argumentative, and we really weren't. But we were just he was just trying to get me to be firm in what I believed. So if that's the case in any kind of disagreement, that's number one. Number two, a manipulator will have temper tantrums or make threats if they don't get their way. If you do this, or if you don't do this, then this will happen. I'm going to walk out. Sometimes they even the point of violence or fits of rage. I'm going to take this away from you. If you don't do what I say, if you don't do the right thing, and again, the right thing goes back to number one, you have to agree with them on the right thing. If you don't do the right thing according to them, then they'll threaten to walk away. Number three, manipulators can they consistently use guilt to influence your emotions so that you will roll over, and they will use guilt to make you feel that you're wrong when really the opposite is true. When you look at manipulation, manipulation and motivation are two totally different things, but they can be close. Manipulation is always, and I want to use this word, massaging the situation for a personal benefit. That's manipulation. Motivation is many times it can seem like the same, but it is for the greater good of another person or for the whole. If you're in a business and you're the manager, it is your job to motivate people positively and negatively to do their job. Positive would be a bonus. Negative would be they get fired. But if you're only doing the manipulation so that you get the bonus and they get no reward, that's manipulation. That would not be right. But if you use guilt, a lot of times parents use guilt. A lot of grandparents use guilt. I've seen a lot of families where it's a broken home and the parent that wasn't there later in life will use guilt for, why didn't you call? Why don't you call? Why aren't you more involved in my life? And yet that child for 20 years never had that parent in their life. They don't even know the parent. So if someone is using guilt to make you feel bad about who you are, your decisions, what you're doing, and again, if your decisions are not going against, like the old saying, if they're not illegal, immoral, or fattening, guess what? Guess what? As long as you're true to yourself, you're walking in love with other people and you're trying to serve other people, there shouldn't be any issue, you would not think. Number four, manipulators will expect more from you and they're never satisfied. You always have to go to them. You always have to pick them up. I remember one time, years back, I had a friend and I had a car when I was 16. So every time we went somewhere, it was my gas. Now, he wanted to go everywhere we went. And one day I just finally asked him, and it was getting hard on me to come up with the gas all the time, and I did it. And I finally just said, brother, I can't do it. I said, I need some help with gas. Fine. And he gives me $1. And at that time, I'd buy about a gallon of gas, which would take me about 20 miles in my little car. But he was never satisfied. It was always very one-sided. If the relationship you have isn't mutually benefiting both of you, that is usually a sign of manipulation. And if you feel indebted and obligated to continue to try harder and harder to please, that's a telltale sign of manipulation. If a person questions your ability and your motives and make you begin to doubt your ability and motives, that many times is a sign of manipulation. It really gets into just a control thing. You aren't good enough. You'll never be good enough. If you don't have me influencing your life, you're never going to be. I'm shocked I'm at this point in my life how many parents I've heard, and they will tell their kids, without my help, you'll never do anything. You'll never amount to anything. If that is the mindset and the voice that you hear, you need to run from some of that, because those voices are not adding to who you are. Actually on this point, if they are constantly challenging your motives and your abilities, it can actually make you look up to the manipulator as if, boy, they know it all. They have all the answers. And the truth is, I don't have all the answers. I think I do sometimes, but I don't. You don't. None of us do. Great scripture says, there's safety in the multitude of counselors. But manipulators will really try to leverage that position. Let's do some George Bush hands here. So that you feel on the lesser end. Now, another thing is manipulators can constantly put you down while they lift themselves up. You didn't do that as good as I did. And if there's a guilt issue in it, and it is a trying to control you, it continually puts you down, continually questioning you, constantly degrading you, sometimes they'll call you names. Well, you're just stupid. I worked for a guy one time for 2 weeks. That's all I could take. I quit. I went back to where I was, the other job I had. And he was just the worst manipulator. And what's funny was it was a Christian company. And I called him out on it and went to the boss, and he goes, well, that's just how he is. What's funny was he was manipulating them. He wasn't even the boss. He was just like a foreman. Another sign, a telltale sign, manipulators have to have their way. Have to have their way. Classic example of that is everybody gets in the car, manipulator gets in the car, everybody's talking where we're going to go eat. Well, I don't care where we go eat, manipulator. I don't care where we go. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me. Well, let's eat Chinese. Well, I don't want to eat Chinese. I mean, now, we're going to eat Chinese. Well, let's eat Mexican. No, I don't. Well, if that's what y'all want, And then you ask them, where do you want to go? Well, I don't care. Just wherever y'all want to go. No, that is a subtle form of manipulation. Now, again, that they may not, but if you ask them, do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And they go, well, I don't care. Guess what? They evidently do if they don't ever want to go where you say. But in a controlling relationship, they have to have their way. They jockey to have their way. They will work the situation to have their way. It's a terrible sign. Now, another sign, number 8, is they will walk away from you, and they will walk away from responsibilities to leverage control. Classic example of this is in work. You let there be a big deadline, you let there be something that has to happen, and that person's not getting their way and they want to manipulate it. It's amazing how the hard drive dies or the files are lost. And then all of a sudden they get to come in and save the day. I actually was on staff at a church, and me and a guy had a conversation, and he said every time he had to work in this one area, every time something was wrong. It was a very technical area of the church in the sight, sound, video, audio, visual, performance section. And he says, but the guy who was over it would come in and save the day. Last moment, save the day. And what's funny is he looked at me, the guy I'm talking to, and he looked at me and he said, I truly believe he sabotaged the electronics we were working with. Every time, he says, because every time I did it, he goes, I came out looking bad. And that person would leverage it so that they were important and we couldn't get rid of them. So if they're doing that, if someone's in your life and they are constantly walking out on you on those moments that you need help, that you need support, it's a great sign of manipulation. A manipulator will finagle ways to impose their will. Emails, calls, whatever. The underlying essence of that controlling person is their desire to achieve their agenda at your expense. And lastly, if a manipulator threatens to end a relationship. Now I'm just going to use this, okay? And again, I come from a Christian viewpoint. So if you're not a Christian, that's fine. Just get the principle. But God Almighty loves all mankind. He never looks at mankind and says, listen, I'm walking away from you. In the story of the prodigal son, the father runs to the son. You never see the story of the father running away. The only time you ever see that happen is when the child in that story, he left. But the father, the leader in that story, he never turned his back and walked away. He was there. He was willing. So if someone threatens to end their relationship every time, and again, if it's time for the relationship to end, you need to learn some boundaries and let the relationship end. And I'm not talking marriage. I'm not talking, things parenting where there's a long-term commitment, but especially work, friends, business association, mentors. But if they're threatening to walk away, to leverage and manipulate you to get something out of you, sometimes in sales, this is very common, especially in car sales. Well, this deals with this moment. If I get up and walk away from this table, you'll never get this car at this price. Well, let them walk away. I promise you, there's 30 other, at least in Atlanta where I live, there's at least 30 other dealerships that'll probably be glad to work with you. So that's another one. So I want to give you a couple things you can do to try to deal with the manipulator. Now, I'm just throwing this out there, okay? I said this already, I have grown up around some world-class manipulators. You'll ask them right off the bat, can I help? Can I do? No, I don't want. So you go about your business, and then all of a sudden, well, it's like, well, if you really cared about me, you would do this. Well, you know, and it really had nothing to do with care or love or concern, but it's just their desire to get their will, their motive, their agenda at the expense of whatever you wanted. So number one, if you're the victim of a manipulator, number one, forgive yourself and give yourself grace. Everybody has to mature. Everybody has to grow. And sadly, there are people who will take advantage of everybody. And there are people who will try to manipulate you and leverage you and impose their will upon you. When that happens and you realize it, forgive yourself. Many times we're more mad at ourselves than we are at the person who did it. We'll realize that person has cheated me, manipulated me, worked against me not for my betterment. That they've done things that have harmed me, that have hurt me. It could be physical manipulation, could be, it could be sexual, could be verbal, could be whatever, could be very passive aggressive. And we will feel anger at ourselves. Forgive yourself. Give yourself some grace. You're not perfect. Again, there's a great scripture which says, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just. But forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. Number two, great way to handle a manipulator. Practice the diplomatic no. You don't have to be mad. You don't have to be angry. Have you ever watched two people argue in the restaurant? And one of them's just all over the place, and the other one's just calm, and they're trying to de-escalate by the voice. I'm thinking of a guy right now, and he's a great guy. He's a good guy. But buddy, if anything starts going against him, buddy, his volume goes up about 2 octaves, and he bam, he hits him hard. And what's funny is that he's doing it to get his way. And anybody who's ever dealt with him, what's funny is if they will lower their voice and almost be passive but firm, very diplomatic, he'll almost always eventually realize he's going beyond the pale of where he should be. So practice giving a diplomatic no. Practice it, all the time. No's a good word to learn. Somebody asks you to do something you really don't have time, tell them no. You don't have to go to every family reunion. You don't have to go to every, work picnic or church event. Not saying you should be a sluggard either, but you don't have to do everything. You can say no and be diplomatic. So, number three, how to handle a manipulator. Do questions that give a little bit of pushback. Give you 3 questions you can use. Manipulator comes up and says, I need this, this, and this, and and you can tell. They don't care what your desires are. They don't care whatever. And again, I'm not talking a work relationship where they're just asking you to come in, but they're trying to manipulate you to do something, especially on an illegal. Ask them, does this seem reasonable to you? You could ask you this too. You could say, would you be willing to do this? I'll give you another one. Are you really expecting me to do this for you? And if they keep pushing, especially on like a judgment level, I just ask them, say, does my opinion really count, or is yours the only one that matters? And if they push back, that's a good sign they're manipulating, and they're not trying to find a common ground. Manipulators will often back down if they're faced with anybody. A true manipulator is really just a bully. So if you will push back, again, keep your voice calm, be very resolute. Number 4, use time as an ally. Use your time as an ally. They come in, they start working on you and all that. And again, if you're used to and you've lived in that relationship of manipulation, it's hard to break free. But if you're in that and you're coming out of it and you've forgiven yourself and you're practicing the diplomatic no's and you're pushing back with questions, use time. I'll just say, listen, I got to think about that. Let me get back with you in a week. Oh, no, we got to know now. Just let them say, no, you don't. And if they push, say, well, then I'm just not going to answer now. Just not doing it. Number 5, this is my favorite one. And this is hard. You got to confront them. You just have to confront them. And part of confrontation in that is you have to be willing to walk away. I think that's one of my key values of life on so many things. You've got to be willing to walk away. If somebody ever believes they own you or they can make you do whatever, your value and your appreciableness diminishes. Geometrically diminishes. A husband who does not appreciate his wife. Heard a pastor say one time, he was counseling this couple, and he asked him what was wrong, and he said the wife immediately broke down in tears, just crying. He said, I don't mean crying, I mean like weeping, deep inner sobbing. And she calmed down. He said, well, what is it? And she goes, well, he said she couldn't hardly say it, but she goes, he never tells me he loves me. So he looked at the husband and said, well, is this true? And the guy looked at him, he goes, well, I'm still here. Pastor looked at him and he said, well, brother, the dog's here. But the only reason the dog's here doesn't have a better offer. That husband had gotten to the place to where he took for granted his wife. Anytime that happens, that can be a sign of manipulation, but it's also a sign of value. And you should value yourself enough to confront whoever's manipulating and say, no, wait a minute, that's not going on. That is not going to happen. And I just want to throw this out. Satan, in a spiritual sense, he is a master manipulator. He will tell you, if you go back to Adam and Eve, he said, doesn't it look good? Doesn't it, what? He starts manipulating. You know what the rules are. You know what the boundaries of life are. But a manipulator will say, well, it's just one time. It's just this. It's just that. And it may sound scary to confront them. I get that. But I promise you, the moment you do, you'll discover strength you didn't know you have. You'll discover resolve that you had never found. The moment you begin to step forward and take a decision and act, you will, it's an empowering moment to realize and just say, listen, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to be manipulated by you. I had a conversation just recently, and every time I tried to talk, they wouldn't hush. And so they were used to just that, hammering. And I finally said, listen, I said, can you hush for long enough for me to say anything? I confronted it. I didn't say it mean. I didn't say it harsh. I didn't scream or yell. Didn't use curse words. But I said, is that okay? Can I? And they finally pulled back. And in that situation, from what I've found out since then, that person never does that. But the reason being is nobody ever confronts them. So you have to confront that. And you have to, and again, if you want to use a spiritual lesson, God's not giving you a spirit of fear. You need to have some confidence and rise up. And pray and ask God to bless you in that, to give you wisdom. And pick your time. If they're a massive manipulator and they're constantly, just slamming certain things, let me tell you something. Make sure it's in a public place. A true manipulator does not want to look like the jerk of all times. So make sure it's in a Starbucks, it's in the Taco Bell, it's in the restaurant you love, it's in the Rib Shack. And confront, say, no, we're not doing that. I'm not doing that. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't want to do that. And that's just not going to happen. And when you confront them and you say those words and you push back, don't say another word. Let them process that. And here's the other side. You may have to do it over and over. If they're used to manipulating you in every area, or in many areas, or in the areas that they know they can control you, it may take a little bit of time for you to push back. And I'm just going to throw this out there. There are some relationships, though, if it is so bad. I'm not talking marriage, I'm not talking parenting. But lastly, and this would be number 6, you may just need to break the relationship. You don't need to keep putting yourself in that position to be abused. You don't need to put yourself in the position to be taken advantage of. You do not need to be put in the position to where you are constantly the doormat for that other person. You do not need to do that. You need to work at the best level you can to be who God made you to be. Convictionally believing that what you're doing is right, and to use what I call just the definition of ethics. You do what's right because it's right, and you do it right. And if you do that truly, you won't manipulate somebody. You won't leverage them. You won't force them. You'll let them make their decision, and you'll walk in unity together. So I'm going to challenge you. Number one, if some of the things I just said, you're like, well, I've done that and I do that. Don't be a manipulator. Bless people, help people, encourage people. If what you are asking of someone helps the greater good, helps the benefit of the family, the benefit of your company, then by all means ask for it. But if you're having to sit back and connive and work away so that you can get what you want at the expense of another person, that is wrong. That is manipulation. Don't be that person. But if you've been a victim of manipulation, again, forgive yourself and just be who you're called to be. You're never going to be happy until you're who you're called to be, until who you believe you were supposed to be. So rise up. Have a great life this week. Enjoy life. And don't listen to the manipulators. Get unstuck in that area. Push back. Diplomatic no's. Do all the stuff I just said. It'll be in the show notes, all those steps again. But push back and be who you're called to be. There's no one on this earth like you. So quit trying to be like everybody else. You know, compromise isn't probably the greatest thing anymore. It's conformity. Just trying to be like everybody else. And it's even worse when you're forced to by somebody else's design. Be who you're called to be and enjoy the life that God's given you. And that's all I got this week. Hey, next week I'm going to be talking about the number one thing that undermines almost all of us and how we can handle it and overcome it. And so, hey, thanks for being with us this week on the Chris Vaughn Podcast. If you will, drinking some water. If you will, go to iTunes, leave us a review, share this, let your friends know about it. Thanks for being with us. Have a great week. And as you get ready for Christmas, there's only a couple weeks left. Make sure you keep the right reason and the right focus, because Jesus is the reason for the season. And remember, get your life unstuck, do some smart living, and get you some passive income so you can take the pressure off. Hey, this is Chris Vaughn. We will be back with you next week on the Chris Vaughn Podcast. We'll see you then.